it's interesting that we seem to be concentrating now, in this little point in time, on soil. So it's a natural segue into introducing Andrea Koch. She leads the Soil Carbon Initiative at the United States Studies Centre, and like many of us, she comes from a farming background. She grew up on a broadacre farm in South Australia. Her family still farm the land that was settled by our ancestors in the 1800s. Andrea's presentation involves giving a voice to soil, and I'd ask her to come and join us now.
If you've been to Port Douglas, you might recognise this iconic coconut palm grove. This image is on tourism brochures and websites around the world. And so when the Cairns Local Council decided earlier this year to cut these trees down, it caused an absolute outrage. People love these trees. Have you ever tried to cut a tree down in your backyard? Got to go through the local council, sign forms, go through the red tape, get an arborist, blah, 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 blah. It's a hard thing to do. It's because trees have a voice in our society. People care about trees and people speak for the trees. There's even a Lorax that speaks for the trees, created by Dr. Zeus in 1972 and brought to the big screen this year by Universal Studios. If I talk about the clearing of the Amazon, old-growth forests, wood chipping, Tassie forests, why guns can't get finance. You know what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about trees. Because trees have a voice in our society. I did a Google image search of water logo, and this is what came up. And I'm sure that there's at least one or two logos in there that you recognise. We all know about turning off the tap when we brush our teeth, and having 2-minute showers and not hosing down our driveways to get the leaves off, because water has a voice in our society. I did the same Google image search for soil logo, and this is what came up. And some of you might recognise some of these, but most people wouldn't recognise any of these logos. These are not big brands. There's not much media weight behind these logos. Because you see, soil is silent in our society. Soil has no voice in our society. You know, we don't hear about soil huggers. And we don't see people chained to the soil. There's no Lorax for the soil. We don't think about soil very much. We don't read about it much. We don't talk about it. Who cares? Is that important? Does it matter that soil has no voice? Well, I'm here to tell you today that it's absolutely crucial that we give soil a voice in our society. And here's the reason. Soil underpins life. If there's no soil, then there's no life. If we run out of oil, we won't die. We'll learn how to harness the energy from the sun. The climate will change and we'll adapt. Human beings have been adapting to climate change variation for millennia. But if we run out of soil, we're in big trouble. If the polar bears die, it'll be really sad, and it will be really bad for polar ecosystems. But human beings probably will survive if polar bears die. Civilisations, history's shown over time that civilisations that forget about their soil collapse. This has happened time and time again. Soil underpins life. Think about it this way. Every single one of us today has already had the benefits of soil. The breakfast we ate grew in soil. The coffee and tea we drank grew in soil. The milk in our lattes came from cows which ate grass which grew in soil. The water that you washed in this morning at some point went through the soil on its way from the sky into your tap. Soil is a big holding tank for water, and in fact soil holds more water on the fresh water on the planet than all of the rivers and lakes put together. It holds water to make it available for plants. Water moves through soil, it moves across land and through land and across catchments, and then into the dams and the rivers, and then into our taps. So if we run out of soil, we're in big trouble. And I can see you sitting there thinking, well, that's not going to happen, is it? Well, it could. Soil degradation is a big, silent problem. And there's many forms of soil degradation and many threats to soil. In many developing countries, topsoil has been systematically scooped up and made into bricks, as we can see in this image here. If China gave all of its population houses made from bricks, it would use up all of its topsoil. And as these developing countries increase in population, these people, and incomes rise, these people want houses and they want food. So really, they shouldn't be using their topsoil to make bricks. In many countries, we're building our cities over soil. The Europeans call this soil sealing. And this map of Melbourne shows projected growth of Melbourne up to 2030. And the brown bits around the edge are where it will be in 2030. And all the green bits are the market gardens and the veggie gardens and so forth that are providing the food. So what happens in countries like ours where there's big agriculture? Well, where we use inappropriate farming techniques, we plough too much or we overgraze, we lose carbon out of our soil. And Australian agricultural soil has lost about 50% of its carbon since the introduction of farming. And when we lose carbon, we lose the structure and the soil becomes vulnerable to erosion. And sometimes in the city we see the soil passing through in a dust storm. In all of these floods that we've had recently, I haven't seen a single media report talking about what happened to the soil. But these images from Three Rivers Station in the southern rangelands in Western Australia show what happens when a big flood event moves across degraded soil. And this satellite image shows, and this big brown plume, it shows the soil running from the Three Rivers Station into the sea. So soil degradation is a big problem. It's actually up there with climate change, but no one really knows about it. And why is that? It's because soil has no voice in our society. You know, we've all moved to cities. 50% of the world's population now lives in cities, more than 50%. And in Australia, the ratio is even higher. And we have these elaborate supply chains that bring food from those areas and into our cities. And our experience of food is that we go to the supermarket and that's where we get food from. And so we've been become disconnected from the soil in which our food is actually growing. And as we've moved to the cities, the soil has slipped through our hands and it's slipped out of our minds. And so we've lost connection with it. So soil needs a voice, clearly, in our society. And what would happen if we gave voice to soil? Well, if we gave voice to soil, we would learn that soils ain't soils. In fact, there are many, many different types of soils depending on the geology and the climatic conditions from which they came from. And Australia has the widest variety of soils, actually. We have a really amazing range of soils of all different varieties. And our soils are ancient and they're highly weathered. And they are still capable of producing and being productive and functioning as soil if we look after them. And we've heard this morning about some cases of fragile soils and how they need to be cared for. If soil had a voice, we would know that carbon in soil is a really important thing. Carbon gives soil its structure, which enables it to hold water, enables it to cycle nutrients properly, it holds it together. And it also means that soil can become a sink for carbon, a major sink for carbon. And this is Photosynthesis 101. So trees and grass take in carbon dioxide, release oxygen, use the carbon to grow the plant, and also carbon moves through the roots of the plant and into the soil to make it available as food for the bugs and the biota that live in the soil. And dead plant matter, leaves and roots and things, come into the soil and are broken down by the biology that's in the soil. And then we get carbon dioxide being released from those bugs. So Soil is part of the overall carbon cycle, but we really haven't heard very much about that. We've heard about the atmospheric half of the carbon cycle, but we haven't heard very much about soil being the other part, or another major part of the carbon cycle. If soil had a voice, we might be inclined to pick up a handful of it and know by the feel of it whether it was healthy or not, whether it had lots of carbon in it. And soil that has good carbon content feels healthy. It feels like it's going to grow something. You know, we see these iconic images of farmers holding a handful of soil or the soil running through their fingers. And good farmers know their soil, and they know the state of their soil by the feel of it and by the smell of it, and sometimes even by the taste of it. If soil had a voice, we would know that it is the home for the most complex ecosystems on the planet, and that a teaspoon of healthy soil holds more organisms than human beings have ever lived on our planet. A healthy teaspoon of soil has billions of bacteria in it, and metres of fungal hyphae, and thousands of protozoa. And these are just the things that you can't see, that are invisible to the eye. And dozens of nematodes. All sorts of wonderful and amazing bugs live in soil. In fact, if I wanted to, I couldn't put all the pictures of them because many of them we haven't even discovered yet. The rhizosphere is one of the most complex, which is the area around the roots of a plant, which is where much of the biota live. Is one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet, and yet it's the one that we know least about. Leonardo da Vinci said hundreds of years ago, we know more about the celestial planets than we know about the soil underfoot. And that's still true today. Soil is the last frontier of science. There's so much we don't know yet, and we're just beginning to know. And in fact, technological advances are now bringing down the cost of soil science, which means that we're going to get an explosion of knowledge in soil. So if soil had a voice, our young people would be racing to become soil scientists because that is the last frontier. If soil had a voice, we would know that unless the nutrients are in the soil that goes into the food that's grown in it, then they won't be in us. The nutritional value of our food relies on the soil in which it's grown. So soil needs a voice. And farmers are at the front line of looking after our soil. Farmers are the stewards. And if soil had a voice, we would know that the farmers are the stewards of this amazing resource that we need. And there are thousands of Australian farmers that have made what I like to call the soil carbon U-turn, which is where they've moved from agricultural practices which led to the loss of soil carbon to agricultural practices and land management that lead to the increase of soil carbon. And, you know, sometimes when we're talking about soil carbon these days, we're talking about it in the context of climate change. And you might hear, well, zero-till is one of those methodologies that will increase soil carbon. Let me tell you, zero-till and minimum-till farming was pioneered before I was born. And I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but it was in the 1960s. So we've actually had half a century of no-till cropping in Australia. These things farmers have been doing this for decades. I can't tell you about all of the farms that I've met, and I'm so pleased that Georgie had her presentation before me, because you've got a 18-minute case study on how farmers look after soil, particularly in grazing systems. But I'll give you a few examples. This is Jeremy Bradley, who's absolutely nuts about his soil. He puts compost amendments onto his pastures and grows fantastic cattle. But he takes cultures from his soil and puts them under a microscope, and he's really interested in what are the bugs in his soil, and he produces these beautiful images. This is Bob Wilson, who's one of a group of farmers in Western Australia. And Western Australia has sandy soil. Unless you can actually get the organic carbon into it, it doesn't grow anything. And that part of the country has been hit first by climate change, by drought, by declining rainfall, etc. And so when that happened, this is the sort of thing that started to happen to that country that they had been trying to crop. And when the wind, that's actually sand. If you can't see in that image, it looks like a desert. And when the wind blew across it, that soil started to blow out to sea. So they had a big problem. And so they started to plant this deep-rooted perennial called Tagesasti, which restored the carbon into the system, started to put structure back into the soil, and as you can see there, they've got pasture. So not only have they reversed desertification, but they are producing beef, and according to some of Bob's figures, carbon neutral beef. And this is one of my favourite case studies. This is some images from the Three Rivers station that I showed you a little bit earlier. It's a 1 million acre station out there in the rangelands, and the Forsyth family are doing what they can to regenerate that landscape. They've destocked, they're regenerating, and you can see here in this bottom left-hand corner, that's the result of the work that they're doing. It's absolutely inspiring. If soil had a voice, our public policy would be supporting farmers that reversed soil degradation and land degradation and bring it back into production. So I work with a team of world-leading soil scientists with the Soil Carbon Initiative at the United States Study Centre, and these scientists were so concerned about global soil degradation that we've come up with this new term to try and bring some focus onto soil. And the term is soil security. And soil security is about soil being the solution, not the problem. The problem is soil degradation. If we can secure our soils, then we can get a whole lot of other benefits. And one of the key indicators of soil security is soil carbon. Because if we can put carbon back into our soil, not only do we have an opportunity to mitigate climate change, but we also underpin food and fibre production, which means that we get food security. We underpin food security. We underpin water security because we have this wonderful water-holding receptacle, which is the soil. We can get a great diversity of life back into the system, so we underpin biodiversity. We ensure that soil can continue to deliver the ecosystem services that we rely on it to deliver, and it can contribute to energy sustainability. So soil is the solution. And soil security is something that we need to be talking about in the same way that we talk about climate change. So I hope I've convinced you that soil needs a voice. We need 100% awareness on this. We need everyone to know that soil is important and that soil needs a voice. We need little kids to be just as excited about the bugs in soil as they are about dinosaurs. We need books, movies, we need a Lorax for the soil, art, songs. We need businesses to understand where is soil in their supply chain and what happens if it goes and what are they going to do about it. We need soil literacy, soil back into the curriculum, kids and people at school learning about soil. And we need public policy, we need politicians to listen and to understand that soil is important and that our farmers are the stewards of this vital resource. So I invite you all to join me on this journey of giving voice to soil. Thank you.